Adventures in Venture.
I can't fucking do that. Okay. I thought it was some audio thing. My chair just made a spoinging noise. Wait, are we actually, do I just start? Is that what it is? Okay. Welcome to Adventures in Venture. My guest is Gareth Mitchell, or as I know him, Millie. Millie is, or was, the presenter of BBC Digital Planet between 2005 and 2023 when the show was brought to its conclusion by the BBC. He has worked as a reporter, initially as a reporter for the BBC since 1993 and then subsequently as a presenter on its science programmes. He also worked for Radio Netherlands in 1995. He's been a lecturer at Imperial College since 1998 where he teaches MSc students science communication. And a little known fact, Millie and I used to play in a band together. We might get onto that in the podcast or we might not. And he's just started his own podcast called the Gareth and Bill Cast. So Millie, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here, Evan.
I'd like you to introduce yourself.
Well, nice one. Thank you very much, Evan. And it's lovely to be here on the podcast. So Millie, just to explain to some people, it's my nickname, which I've had since I was in the sixth form. And you and I met a long time ago, soon after I'd been a student. So people were still calling me Millie. And you've resurrected that nickname. And it's lovely.
It is impossible for me to call you anything else. People call you Gareth. I'm like, he's not Gareth, he's Millie. In fact,
he is.
A friend of mine, a guy called Gordon Bateman, insists on calling you Mitch. I don't quite know why, but
I've been called worse.
Well, sort of rhymes with bitch, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's why exactly what I mean when I say I've been called worse.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, but it's hello everybody, and I'm Millie or Gareth or whatever you want to call me, and I do lecturing in science communication, as you said in the introduction there, Evan, and then until this year, 2023, I was the presenter of Digital Planet, so I hung on to that for about 17 years, and then finally, for various reasons, that ended this year, and so yeah, now I've started a new podcast going along the BBC trope, really, Evan, of doing a show on the BBC for a long time, then it ends, then you set up your own podcast. So it's highly predictable.
So, Millie, I want to start by asking you how you grew up. You were born in Eastleigh, I believe, in England, but you grew up in Montgomeryshire in Wales, strangely, in a small village called Castle Corinion. And there's a very, very odd coincidence because although you and I didn't know each other when we were very young, I grew up in New Zealand and you grew up in England, my mother was born and grew up in Castle Corinion and her whole side of the family is there. So quite how that strange coincidence comes about, I don't think either of us know. But I want to ask, how and why did your family end up in Wales if you were born in England?
Yeah, sure. And it's just lovely that we're able to give airtime to a place called Castle Corinion, a tiny place in mid-Wales. And where I actually lived was an easier to pronounce village called Gilsfield, which was not far from Castle Corinion. But for people who don't know the geography of that region, it's right on the border. It's one of the first places you get to when you cross into mid-Wales if you're coming from the Midlands. Yeah, so I was born in Eastleigh, in England, so just near Southampton, near the south of England, for people listening to this who may not be in the UK. And my father was Welsh. She's not with us anymore. My mother, who I'm very glad to say is still with us, is English. And so I'm a weird hybrid of Welsh and English. And so I think for my father, he just always wanted to find a reason to go back to Wales, and he was from mid-Wales originally. So he worked in pharmaceuticals and stuff, and that's a whole long story, but that's, it was for work reasons that we lived in the Eastleigh, Chandler's Ford area of the south of England, and then we moved to another place when I was tiny, to a place called Farnham Common near Slough, also in England, not far from Heathrow Airport. That kind of, I've made it sound a bit not very nice, or just near the airport, but it was a lovely little place called Farnham Common. And getting to the point of going to Wales, it was when I was 8 years old. My father took the plunge, and my mother, of course, and decided that there was opportunities there that my dad wanted to do job-wise. He got a marketing job in a kind of government quango really that was all about developing Mid Wales, and so we upped sticks and left Farnham Common and ended up in Gilsfield, and that was in 1979. And I remember it was 79 because it was probably one of my first experiences of being politically aware, because it was that election campaign which of course Margaret Thatcher ended up winning, but I just remember all the election posters up all over the place, and Conservative posters for Delwyn Williams, who became our local MP in that landslide 1979 Tory victory in the election. So anyway, I won't get into the politics of it all, but that's to kind of put it reasonably simply how I ended up in Mid Wales.
That would have been a very interesting time to have moved to Wales. It would have been quite an interesting contrast to Farnham Common. Actually, strangely, I have a number of friends who live in and around Farnham as well. But one of the reasons I asked the question is, what's led you to where you are now? And I know that when you were young, you played around with computers. Your dad obviously bought a computer home for you when you were, I don't know how old you were. How old were you?
13, I think that first computer. Do you want to know what kind of computer it was, Evan? You'll like
Well,
this.
I already know, but you're going to tell me anyway.
Right, you do already know, Commodore VIC-20.
Well, see, that's another thing we have in common. So strange. I mean, my dad also bought home a Commodore VIC-20 when I was a kid, and I used it. I learned to program myself. I didn't learn to program myself because that's not possible. But no, I learned to program the computer using a book. So I didn't actually do it myself. I used the book that I was given called What to Do After You Press Return. I think that's what it was called, something like that. But coming back to you, what I'm really interested in is how that sort of bit of early experience got you interested in science and technology and computers. But I want to kind of start with your dad and/or your mum and what they did and how that led to that. So could you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, sure. So Dad worked in pharmaceutical marketing originally. So he never went to university. I think his dad wanted him to be a doctor, and I think my dad considered going into medicine, but it was around the time of national service, and I think he felt that if he did medicine, he could get out of doing national service, but he actually felt, no, it'd be good for me, I'm going to do national service. So he went in and did that, and then but he always loved science at school. And so I think it was through that he was especially interested in the pharmacological side of things. And then he ended up working for various pharmaceutical companies like Warner Lambert, for instance, but more on the marketing side. And then he realised he had a flair for marketing, which then led him to have a marketing job in this development quango called the Development Board for Rural Wales, which was a development board responsible for developing rural Wales.
So they were kind of promoting businesses coming to Wales and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Very much that kind of thing.
So when did he work with computers? I mean, what caused him to bring a computer home for you? That's what I'm really asking.
Yeah, sure. They worked with some rudimentary computers in his national service.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I guess in the 1950s. I'm trying to do the sums here, but if he was born in
punch
1937,
cards and like those huge floppy disks and stuff.
Well, I think it was that kind of thing. Yeah, because he did talk about swapping out computer modules. So born in 30. Sorry, it's a tedious maths on the radio, isn't it, or arithmetic on the radio? But born in 37, national service when he was around 20. So this would have been the late 1940s. Into the early 1950s.
I would imagine that back then you would have needed a JCB to swap out a computer module. Probably.
I think you would have done, and I realise my maths is bad. He'd have been 10 in 1947. I'm so sorry. Okay, so
he could have been swapping out computer modules when he was 10 using a JCB.
Very
it's possible.
Developer and JCB enthusiast.
Were there even computers in 1950? I don't know.
I think very
big ones.
They were very big. So certainly, if
they had vacuum tubes,
more
right?
correctly getting to the kind of mid to late 50s when Dad would have been doing his national service, then but he did actually talk to us about they had these at the time. Obviously, they seemed very advanced, but by our standards, even more basic than a VIC-20, if that's possible, which it was. But he did say that they were made of these modules, obviously, and it was all valves. It was before the advent of transistors, and so these things were always going wrong. And one of his jobs actually was to swap out one of these modules if it went wrong, and then go and put another one in. Maybe with a JCB, but I think my dad must have been big and strong, and he did that. But he was always interested in that kind of thing. And the other relevant part of this conversation about why Dad got into computers and electronics and stuff was that the division that he was in national service was the signals. So that was his whole thing, just working with radio.
So sorry, just let me get this clear. You So obviously he wasn't swapping out computer modules when he was in the pharmaceuticals industry, or I don't think he was. When did this computer modules bit
Oh, sure.
come?
That was
What was that associated with?
That was in his national service.
Just
I
his head?
don't know if he chose to be in this, if you had any choice where you went, or maybe he lucked out. But whatever it was, he was in the fun bit where you got to play with radio equipment. And
Okay,
electronics.
so he was in essentially an engineering core kind of piece of the army, and therefore he was fiddling around with computers, and that's where he was changing these
modules.
Right.
Yeah.
With or without JCB. Yeah.
Indeed, I'll have to fact check that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool. So that is what led to him bringing you a computer home, and sort of, I guess he kind of realised that this was the technology of the future, and so it was something that you, as his son, should learn about, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. He just really felt, and I think I had a natural inclination to all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So he wanted me to go to university. He was absolutely intent on me going to a place called Imperial College, funny enough. And, so maybe that was all part of that.
Well, he did.
Grooming is the wrong word, really, isn't it? But the encouraging me.
His master plan.
Go in that general direction.
His master plan has been fulfilled. Here you are. You are. Let's describe you as a linchpin of science communication at.
But I'm happy to be described in that way.
Has anyone ever called you a linchpin before?
No, certainly not in a flattering way. No. But I'm happy to add that to my LinkedIn profile right now.
Yes. Okay. I can think of some other words involving the word pin, but that we could add. But anyway, we'll come back to that. Okay. So, look, thank you for that. So, just kind of moving on from that, and I guess what I want to talk about in a minute is about how that led on to the career that you're in at the moment, because I think there are a lot of people listening to this podcast who might actually want to get into a career in broadcasting. Obviously, broadcasting is something quite different to what it is, what it used to be. I mean, maybe it's now should be called narrowcasting, but because actually, it used to be this thing where we just recorded a thing, or we us as in the human race. I'm going very broad now. And then just kind of shot it out over the airwaves to a bunch of people, because that was the technology that we had at the time. The ability that we now have to distribute content around the world using the internet means that the content can be created that's much more specific to people's interests, and so that has had a huge impact on broadcasting as such. And we'll come to that, because you've been through that, and you've been through it as a broadcaster, as a presenter, but also as somebody who's been involved with a podcast, and quite a well-known podcast. So I do want to get into what's happening in that sphere, and in particular how somebody who is thinking about getting into broadcasting could get into it, and what they should be thinking about when they do. And I'm going to be very interested in your thoughts about that. But just before we move off, you growing up and your parents, a couple of questions I just want to ask you. Can you think of any lessons that your parents taught you, either specifically or implicitly, that have stuck with you for the rest of your life? And what I mean by specifically or implicitly is, I'll give you an example. With my parents, if I asked them for money to buy something, they would basically tell me that I needed to go and earn the money myself. And that taught me to be self-sufficient. And so what I'm really asking is, are there any lessons that you can think of that your parents taught you, either by telling you or just by the way that they dealt with you, that have stuck with you through the rest of your life?
Funny enough, it's the money thing. I was just thinking that as you were posing the question, as in being self-sufficient. So we were given pocket money and given extra pocket money if we did jobs like mowing the lawn or what have you.
Yeah.
And definitely. And so I had a paper round. I always wanted to do a paper round. It looked rather fun, to be honest. I think it was an excuse to go and walk on other people's driveways.
What, and throw papers at people?
And throw papers at people.
That's always, I was very attracted by that aspect of the role. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Or throw them at the dog or whatever. So, yeah,
anything,
exactly.
You've got a reason, that's the point. Yeah.
I think one of the main reasons I wanted to get a newspaper round is because I could go back to school and brag to all my mates that I was in the media. I used to say I work in the media because I've got a paper round. True story. So you could tell
Right. There you
where
go.
my pretensions lie.
Yeah. So even at that very early age, you had aspirations to
exactly.
be.
Yeah, and they didn't just,
We'll
if
come
we
to that.
wanted something, they didn't just say, oh, you can have it then. It was, just earn it from your pocket money.
Yeah.
And that life lesson has stayed with me ever since. And, I'm juggling, running. I've got a small little training partnership that I run. Until recently, I was on a weekly radio show, and now doing a weekly podcast, doing various kind of talks, hosting events, doing lots of different things. Many things that would probably fill anybody's or many people's freelance career. I'm doing that in my spare time because alongside that, I have my day job teaching science communication at Imperial College. So coming back to the money thing, I often ask myself, why am I pushing myself this hard? When another freelance gig, I was literally on my emails just now, another thing popped up saying, can you come and host one of our events at an organisation in Paris the week after next? And I thought, I'm really busy, I can't fit it in, I haven't got the bandwidth. But then another part of me thought, well, you can't turn it down, go and do it. And I often wonder what it is about me that I just can't say no to most work. And I think it's just that money ethic. If somebody's offering you a bit of cash to go and do something, I just believe in working hard and going to do it and making a good living for yourself. I'm not expecting it just to be handed to you.
No, but I suspect that there's probably a bit more to it than that with you. And I'm going to put something to you. I think that when you do what you do, it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah,
because you just love it.
That's the other thing. Yeah, like doing my paper round never really felt like work, to be honest.
So doing the paper round felt like work to me because I did one too. But one of the things that I have found to be really important in life, is to try and end up doing something you really love. Because if it doesn't feel like work, you're going to do it better than most other people because you're not doing it for the money. You're doing it because you just love doing it. I mean, and the weird thing is because you then end up doing it better than anyone else, you actually do end up being more economically successful at it. Because I guess you're putting an effort in without really thinking about, what am I getting? Why? How am I being rewarded for this? And I suspect with you, one of the reasons that you're not turning down the work is it's not really work. It's like it's just I'm having a laugh, and getting paid for it. So why wouldn't I do it? Why wouldn't anyone do that?
Welcome to my life. Yeah. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I keep thinking I'll get rumbled at some point.
But that's great. It's at the point when you start thinking, it's fucking amazing. I'm getting paid for this thing. Why? Why? That's a piss take. That's the point that you're doing the right thing. That's the thing for you because you've suddenly discovered that thing which might feel like work to someone else, for you it isn't. It's just what you want to do.
Yeah.
And actually, I think if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the sort of self-actualization thing, if you can get to that point where you're just doing a thing and someone pays you for whatever you love doing, well, there isn't much better than that.
Yeah, happy days. I mean, because I think on a few levels, partly because, if you get up in the morning and think, I'm going to have a right laugh today and I'll be richer when I go to bed than I was this morning, then that's a good thing. But also I think it's just that sense of feeling, I've found my thing in the world. This is... there's not many ways I can contribute, I don't think, to the world, but I just happen to talk for a living and it seems to work out, so why not?
So, just what you said something in that conversation, which was possibly slightly tongue-in-cheek, but you said that your paper round was the thing that got you into media. So, what I'm really asking is, when did you decide that you wanted to be in media and why?
Yeah, sure. So I must have been about 7 or 8 years old, Evan. It was
at that age.
Ago.
Oh my God!
Seriously.
I had no idea what I wanted to do at 7 or 8. I was like, I didn't even know what I was doing.
Yeah, and I didn't
climbing trees and falling out of them and stuff. I think I fell off the church rafters and broke my collarbone when I was about that age, probably.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know what I was doing in the church rafters. My parents didn't either.
I was going to say there's a story in that, but. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it wasn't a particularly sophisticated view of what I might do in the media, but I think I just wanted to work in TV, even though, ironically, I've never really done much telly. I've ended up in radio and been much happier for it. But no, I think it was... I blame the BBC, would you believe it? I think it was just... I always used to love it if I was watching something like Record Breakers or Blue Peter or Swap Shop, where... they would take you behind the scenes in the studio. They were always doing it on Swap Shop, and they'd show you, and you'd see all the cameras and stuff like that. And I just thought it was magic. I just thought, I'd love to do that. And I didn't know whether... I think probably if anything I wanted to be the lighting technician, because I used to watch Top of the Pops and think, I'd love to do the lights for Top of the Pops.
Yeah.
But then, of course, as you go into your teens and then through university, you get a more sophisticated view of what the media is about and the different strands of media.
Yeah.
And then later on, it just became absolutely apparent that I absolutely wanted to do radio. But yeah, honestly, the hankering to be in the media and specifically broadcast media, that's honestly, I was about 7 or 8 years old, and I knew I wanted to do it, and I knew I would.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. It is unusual, I think, for people to... maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's me, but I think it is unusual for people to have such a clear idea of exactly what they want to do at such an early age. I think that's unusual. So, how did you get started in radio?
So, radio was student radio, actually. That's how I started. So, I went through school, got quite geeky, got into maths and physics and those kinds of subjects, and then went to university, to Imperial College, and did electronics at Imperial.
Yeah.
And then, pretty much in my second week at Imperial College, I discovered that it had a student radio station. I didn't even know universities had student radio stations. So I went, and they were giving out free pizza or something. I went in to look at the studio, and I said, can I do a show? And they said, yeah, there's one in an hour's time, basically. Just go on, just open the mic fader and off you go. And it was just brilliant, Evan. It was just so good. So at that point, I don't think I could honestly sit here and tell you that that's where the light bulb moment where I knew I was going to work in radio. I think at that point, I just thought, this will be my thing, or one of my things, as while I'm a student.
How old were you when you did that first little piece of was it broadcasting? Was it going out live on radio? What was it? So
the student radio was live on... Yeah,
it was live?
I was...
So what would you just sit down and what... Well, what'd you do?
You just played records.
Oh, okay. Oh, you were being like a DJ.
Yeah, it's like a DJ kind of thing, yeah.
Okay. So just walk me through exactly what you did. You sat down in front of the mic, you were like... What? To walk me through.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. And the radio station had a brilliant record collection, so it had lots of records that I wished I was able to afford when I was.
Actually, just picked out stuff you liked. You could. This is Spandau Ballet or
it could be
ABBA.
What was I into at the time? It would have probably been like OMD, Human League, Heaven 17. Anyway, and they had a record catalogue, and you'd work out in an hour, you'd get through about 12 records, and then you would talk in between the records, and DJ stuff, so you controlled the mic fader, and you put yourself on air and then faded yourself out again and put a record on. But even in those days, I can't say I took it particularly seriously. It was just an opportunity often to talk a load of nonsense with some mates of mine and then play some tunes that you liked. But even then, I took it seriously enough to be interested in timing. So I'd always time the musical introduction at the beginning of a record, and then get really good at not crashing the vocal and just talking over the intro, and then stopping when the lyric came in.
Right.
So I'd say, it's a 17-second intro or a 30. So, and maybe a slightly serious point here is that it did teach me everything I needed to know to work in radio and making a living out of it at the BBC. I learnt in student radio, talking to time. I had an editor. He used to tell me, the thing about you, Gareth, it was a bit of a kind of thinly veiled comment. It's a bit like, sometimes we don't know what to do with you, but you can talk to time. And it was after just practicing that, record after record for 3 years in the student radio station, and mic technique and interview technique. All of that I turned up with, and rather to my dismay and shock, I realised when you go to the BBC, maybe it's changed now, but when I started in the early 90s, they just expected you to be fully formed. They didn't, you weren't going to get any training on mic technique or interview technique. So thank you, student radio. You taught me everything I kind of needed to know.
So one of the things that was mentioned in this brief that I have on you, because I do have a brief on you, as you know.
That is scary.
Was that being on campus radio almost cost you your degree. Do you want to tell me a bit about that?
Well, it's because it was fun, you know. It was great being on the road. So I went up from one show a week, which was called the Monday Meltdown.
Oh, yeah.
And then I had another one called Wednesday Week. So I had these 2 1-hour shows.
Yeah.
And I was quite reasonably diligent. I'd prepare for them a little bit. And then when I wasn't doing the programmes, I was probably just messing around in the student radio station. And when I wasn't messing around in the student radio station, I was just messing around in the pub. Really. You know,
You mean getting drunk? Is that what you mean?
Basically, yeah.
Okay,
it was. I can't deny it. You know, so I got your archetypal drinking degree. It was a lowest second. You know, 2-2 degree.
A BSc, BA in Guinness?
Yeah, it may as well have been a BA in Guinness, really. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, more officially, it was a BEng in electrical and electronic engineering.
So just. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was just trying to be clear about whether you were drinking Guinness in an artistic or scientific manner.
No, just in a purely enjoyable manner.
Artistic, then. Let's go for
maybe
artistic.
appreciating the shamrock that they might have kind of painted onto it.
Entirely artistic.
But, when they poured it.
I think.
But it was a lot of just. I think I just enjoyed the social life too much, and then the student radio was kind of part of the social life as well. But we did other things. It wasn't just like let's have a wild party in the student radio station. I wasn't quite that sad. I was nearly that sad, but the partying happened in other places, and for most of those 3 years, and so I kind of staggered through, quite literally, I think, with a rather poor degree. But it got me to where I wanted to be, and I'm here now, so whatever. Sorry. And by the way, I actually teach master's students, so this isn't advice I should give to them. Work hard.
I wouldn't. If you teach master's students, I honestly would be worried about the quality of your degree. I think you've done more than admirably. So
I hope so. I mean, ironically, and maybe slightly seriously, I probably wouldn't get my job now. You know, because I've been doing the master's teaching since the late 90s. I think in this day and age, there's no way you'd get a teaching job in a place like Imperial College with the class of degree I have. I'll say that in hushed tones.
And the amount of Guinness you drank.
Yeah. It just wouldn't happen.
Well, I don't know.
I sneaked in.
The world changes, and things happen for strange reasons, don't they? So, I understand your initial dream was to be part of Tomorrow's World. So that's the BBC flagship technology TV program. But you did a visit to a radio studio at Bush House, and that got you obsessed about radio journalism, or possibly being a Concorde pilot. I'm not clear on whether those two things happened in the same place or not, but perhaps you can tell me a bit about that.
All right, then. Yeah, so the Concorde pilot thing happened because, it obviously didn't happen because I never flew Concorde, but my desire to do it happened probably when I was about 9 or 10, saying to Dad, I want to be a train driver. And Dad said, yeah, you could be. It's a great job. But how about being an airline pilot? I thought, oh, yeah.
He was like, okay, this job gets paid a bit more than this one.
I think so.
So I'll just shunt you in that direction, Millie.
Yeah, good train metaphor there as well. I like
Gareth, go in that direction.
So having said that, I obsessed about working in the media for my whole childhood. The other thing I wanted to do is my parallel dream was to fly Concorde. And then the media thing took over.
Well, perhaps in a parallel universe you do.
I'd like to think that somewhere on the other side of some wormhole in a parallel universe that I'm flying Concorde. That'd be a good feeling. Sorry, environment. But maybe it could be on a hypothetical planet where it wasn't wrecking the environment like
could be
Concorde
an electric
did
Concorde.
In this one.
Electric Concorde. Yeah.
That would be a heck of an alternative universe. I'm now having to rewrite everything I know about electronics to see if the energy density would... Anyway, that's enough.
Somebody will make one, I'm sure.
They'll make...
Well, maybe if not electric something.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
We'll work on it, Evan. So, and then Tomorrow's World was... This comes back to wanting to be a media person, and I've already mentioned that I loved watching... programmes where they took you behind the scenes on the BBC, and so one of my favourite programmes was Tomorrow's World, and went out on a Thursday evening, I think, and then
I remember it
around the same time as that Top of the Pops programme as well. And but I just thought Tomorrow's World was brilliant, and it was a live show. And of course, what we all remember about TW is that things always used to go wrong, and that's, I think, what we enjoyed about live TV. And we're all horrible people underneath, and you'd watch, well, I would anyway, and I was horrible. You'd watch Tomorrow's World thinking, I really hope that demo goes wrong in the studio, and of course it quite often did, and it was the best part. But aside from that, slightly
I think that was why we all liked Top Gear, because they always used to be cocking things up so badly.
Wrong.
Right?
Yeah,
it's the whole Jackass thing.
Yeah. But I absolutely loved Tomorrow's World, and it was always my dream to go and work on that show. And one day I did.
Tell us about that visit to the radio studio at Bush House.
Yeah, that was it. It was a transformative moment. What happened there is that I got some work experience on Tomorrow's World. So this was living the dream.
On the TV programme?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Were you featured? Did they dissect you or something?
I was not featured in any way. Okay. I was a mere runner behind the scenes, just fetching things as runners do. But it was working in Television Centre. All I wanted to do is go and work in Television Centre. I didn't care what I did there. If it meant getting teas and coffees for the presenters, that's fine. I'll just do it. I'm just excited to be here. Especially because the Later with Jules studio in those days was the next studio. It's quite a funny story behind this, right? So I've forgotten the exact sequence, but say Tomorrow's World was in Studio 5 and they were doing Jules in Studio 4, and these BBC people may write and say no, it was the wrong way around, but it doesn't matter. But so you had this.
Let them write. Let them write. Let the letters roll.
Let them write. Yeah, exactly.
Let the letters roll in.
Yeah. So in TC4 you had one program, TC5 the other, and so Tomorrow's World, kind of anything went. We were a kind of very laid back kind of team. I say we, even though I was only there for a month doing work experience. And then, but the lovely thing was, around the same time that the session ended at Tomorrow's World and they started the D-rig from the studio, is when they were then gearing up to record Later with Jules. So we were always blagging our way into the Later studio, and we got to see loads of bands that way. And often the Later with Jules crowd, they were a bit kind of raucous, including us, because the beer did flow in those days, even in Television Centre. And then in those days, Newsnight used to come from that same suite of studios in the donut.
Wow.
And I do remember once, I think it was David Dimbleby, but one of them came out and told us to shut up.
Amazing. Now there's your claim to fame. You've been told to shut up by David Dimbleby himself.
Soundproof studios with their massive, great big heavy doors, but somehow the Later with Jules crowd made enough noise to piss off the people at Newsnight.
Can you just imagine David Dimbleby, he's recording, is like, what the fuck is that noise? Somebody go and shut them up.
It's like, I hate doing this programme on a Thursday. It's when they do Later and everybody gets drunk and makes lots of noise. It's much better on a Wednesday.
It's bloody unacceptable.
So I suppose this then leads to going to work in radio. So don't get me wrong. As you can tell, I loved working on Tomorrow's World, and it was like one of those dream come true moments, because I'd watched it as a child, and now finally I'm working there. As, working with, in those days it was Judith Han and Howard and Kate Bellingham. So that was the team then. But the radio studio thing happened because then later I was just given the opportunity to go and sit in on a science programme being recorded in Bush House, which in those days was the headquarters and the studios of the BBC World Service.
Yeah.
And I just went into this radio environment, and despite literally the bright lights of telly, I just thought, no, these are my people, this is my place. I absolutely love it. And a lot of people say, oh, it's not as glamorous, and it's no cameras and lights and things, but it was, to me, it was just so much better. And it was really, maybe it was a student radio thing that had primed me for it, but I just thought, I'm quite moved talking about it now. It's just like a really, I suppose if you're looking for that light bulb moment in the choir in your head going blah kind of thing, that was going into Bush House and seeing a radio programme being made. It's never left me. That's just a beautiful moment.
What do you think it is that made you feel like that?
Gosh, it's just something about that studio environment. That's a very vague answer. Let's try and go a little bit deeper. I think it's something about maybe the discipline of radio, and of course TV had plenty of discipline. Tomorrow's World was live, so they had to be in and out at the right time and stuff. So it can't be that. There's I think it's just something about the procedure and the ritual of being in the radio studio, setting up the microphones, taking the sound levels. You have a guest or something, so you do the little pre-interview with them, and also just the building. I think this comes into some of the reason why it meant so much to me, is that in those days the World Service had its own headquarters. Now it shares office space and studio space with other services from the BBC and Broadcasting House. But in those days, walking into Bush House was like going into the United Nations of radio, and you'd walk along the corridor and there'd be the French for Africa service on one side, and then on another floor there was the Arabic service, and it was, so there was that element. There was this highly international place.
Yes.
And there's just something beautiful about sitting in a radio studio and with a microphone and a mixing desk. The stuff that I went to see was recorded, but if it's live, the idea that you open up a microphone and it is that nation shall speak peace unto nation, or in my case, as I've often done, nation shall speak absolute nonsense to nations if I'm having a bad day. But it's just that whole experience. It's sometimes you can't put into words. Maybe it's like having your first child, and I don't have kids, so I can't know what it's like. But it's just something like that. It was a very strong experience, anyway.
I'm going to put that quote on my wall and frame it. Nations will speak absolute nonsense unto nations.
Copyright Gareth Mitchell 2023.
Yeah. But it's interesting actually, because I think there's a sense in which the BBC was then, and maybe still is to some extent, probably slimmed down quite a lot, this kind of national treasure or artefact that was left over from Britain's imperial past. I mean, there was one point at which Britain was in charge of most of the known world, and that kind of and built up these sort of vast organisations which had tentacles that reached all over the world: the Commonwealth, the East India Trading Company, and the BBC was a sort of one of the last pieces of that.
Yeah, it's. I suppose with the BBC World Service, I mean, I don't.
But the BBC still was that then. It was still.
Yeah, but not really like a tool of imperial coercion. I mean,
no.
I don't think it ever was really.
Well, no, I wasn't suggesting that it was. It was more that it had this great global structure. So, in a way, what I'm saying is that the BBC was one of the last vestiges of the empire.
Yeah,
it still is maybe a little,
but I mean, perhaps in the sense that it's it did have a role that was it would have seen itself as an anti-propaganda role. So the Arabic service started as a means of counteracting Italian propaganda in the east of Africa.
Yeah, it's true.
So there are lots of different reasons why language services happened at the BBC. So. Entirely to say, its main function was to, as a some kind of British state tool to control the colonies. I think wouldn't be quite right. I mean, but it certainly was there. When it first started.
No. And that isn't what I was trying to say at all. I was really just more musing on the fact that this was, from a world perspective, still then, despite whatever Britain's view of itself might have been, an important global entity. I mean, in New Zealand, which is the other side of the world, about as far away as you can get from here, I listened to BBC programs. I watched BBC programs on the TV. It was really a global thing. It had a huge global impact. And actually, going back to those days when there was no internet, and so there was no other global communication mechanism, broadcasting was really important. And I think that point that you made about the propaganda thing, it was used by governments as a tool for getting their message across. If there wasn't, a BBC to put out, I mean, you can call it the view of the British government, you can call it the view of the Western world. But if you had Nazi Germany, for example, they would put out their views and they would broadcast their views.
Yeah,
but that's
they would have state media. You see, I mean, this is an important point. The World Service was never state media. The BBC, it's often accused of being state media, but it isn't.
Well, state owned, but
it never has been.
But no, I realise it's independent and it has its own, and that's part of its mandate. But that's the point. That is the method of combating propaganda. It's a way of getting the truth out. It's the function that to some extent social media serves today.
Sure.
Then you didn't have anything else to balance the propaganda.
I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, it is. It is exactly what I'm getting at.
In this day and age, of course, people can get their news and information from lots of different sources. Many of them actually very dubious and questionable sources. But it is true. And in those days, you'd have a shortwave radio, and then one of the few sources you would get would be the BBC or the Voice of America, or
it was needed to balance out those biased state-controlled news sources, and it still is. I mean, you look at publications. Call it publication. Look at Russia Today. I mean, it's it should be called Propaganda Today. I think. Probably.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it is media. Still is to a lesser extent than it used to be used as a tool to try and influence people's views in a way that it probably shouldn't.
And certainly a function that the World Service did have and was celebrated for was that soft diplomacy, as it were, which is a bit of a weird term, isn't it? But the idea that as Britain's influence in the world has unquestionably declined, I think quite rapidly, even in recent years, that having a broadcaster, a publicly funded public service broadcaster with not. People would argue about this, but it isn't influenced by the government. I've worked there, and you don't have the government bringing you up every 5 minutes telling you what to say. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. But is
it every 10 minutes?
But in a Britain that is doing very well in many ways in a lot of the stuff you know about in terms of innovation and investment and the really exciting things going on in business, that with many other things and industries in decline, that I think it is fair to say that something like the BBC World Service is one of those things, and the BBC brand in general is just one of those things where the UK really does have influence, and not in a creepy propaganda kind of way, but just as a country that's known for having a strong independent public service ethos to its media. And as you can tell, I'm heavily in support of it, but
I think
not so many people are these days.
One of the great things about the United Kingdom is its global outlook on the world, which I think is to a large extent a reflection of the country's past. It's always been a very international, outward-looking country. America...
And it's become so inward now, though, isn't it? In some ways.
I don't know.
I'm thinking about Brexit, for instance, whatever people think of it. But it might be... Although I suppose the Brexiteers would argue, and because I'm so BBC, and I know we're not on the BBC now, but as you can tell, I'm just trying to be balanced. I can't help it. Put me in front of a microphone and I'll say on one hand this, on one hand the other, and I'd make no apology for doing it in this podcast. But I suppose the Brexiteers' point is that actually, no, by leaving the European Union, we become a more global country because it offers access to markets and opportunities that you wouldn't have if you were constrained by the European Union, say some people.
I think
many people.
Strangely, both sides are right. And the question, in other words, if the question is, should we have exited the EU or shouldn't we have exited the EU? And that doesn't mean I'm a fence sitter. I think it was just a short-term, long-term decision. I think in the short term, there's no doubt that it's damaged the country. In the long term, we don't know, but I think it may well prove to be a better decision because the EU is, from an economic perspective, as far as I can see, pursuing a different agenda to England. England is more like America in its culture and its economy and just what it wants to be in the world. And it may well be that is looked back on as a pivotal moment in the country that England becomes, that Britain becomes, and that has helped to kind of provide a platform for where it grows to. And by the way, I would not have voted for Brexit. I didn't vote because I was so sure that we wouldn't Brexit that I didn't bother. And then I woke up the next morning thinking, what the fuck have I done?
Like many people, I think.
Yeah, that happens a lot, yeah. I didn't want to actually cut my arm off with a chainsaw because there was nothing lying on it at the time. But I did feel like that, yeah.
Right.
It was like a Brexit hangover.
I think, I've heard other people say the same, yeah.
I don't think that either side were wrong. They were just talking about different things. But there was definitely a lack of understanding. There was a lack of understanding about the benefits that immigration has for the country. There was also a lack of understanding on the other side about the impact that immigration had on rural communities. I saw both sides of it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I raised in Wales, until I was 18, so
yeah, exactly.
I've seen it.
And that sudden change that all the Bulgarians and Romanians coming to the UK had when those two countries were admitted. I'm not saying that those were mistakes, and I maybe, I suppose it depends on what context you're asking the question, but the thing to me that was so concerning about Brexit was not whether we Brexited or not, although I think I would have preferred that we didn't. It was the way we did it. It was this sort of like, fuck you, Europe. We're just doing our own thing, and we're gonna cut off our nose to spite our face and do things which are going to hurt us because we think that's just going to be playing to our this kind of political base that was very partisan and
dog whistle politics.
Yeah, I think that reaction of doing this hard Brexit just because we felt like we needed to show that we had big muscles or whatever It's just dumb.
Yeah, and it's harking back to the glory days of the Empire and so on.
Yeah, but it was to satisfy. I think if you ask me, the responsibility for this comes back to the government, and it's due to the government's failure to educate people about the benefits of doing what we were doing.
Yeah.
We should have been more. We should have just understand. Everyone should have understood more about, or should have just been educated a bit more about why immigration's a good thing, and then we could have made a decision based on reality, not these kind of twisted facts.
But you're ever going to do that if your political agenda is to...
and that's the problem with politics.
Signal your supporter base to take part in a decision like that, and you have a strong suspicion that the Brexit side's going to win. That's the side you're going to go to, whether you believe in it or not. We,
as the independent media, have the ability to do that, and I say that in a slightly tongue-in-cheek way, but I think that's why I have optimism about the direction that things are likely to go in, because people can learn about how things really are, and they're able to go and actually find out now in a way that they couldn't, and develop what I hope, hopefully, slightly less partisan views, and therefore they can't be hoodwinked by people that tell them X, Y, or Z that actually turns out to only be half the truth. Yeah.
Hope so.
Anyway, I wanted to ask you about your career as a broadcaster. So we've covered how you got to where you are, or how you got to where you were when you started. How did you end up presenting the science program on Radio 4?
Yeah, sure. So I did some work experience at the BBC. I got my very first story on air in 1993, which was an interview about an underwater PC. I remember it very well.
How the hell does that work? It sounds like the most impractical thing that anyone's ever developed.
I thought. That's why it was such a good story. Yeah,
it's like underwater cycling.
Yeah, it's kind of like
just incredibly impractical.
Waterproofed, ruggedized PC. So
or extreme ironing. Have you ever done any extreme ironing?
No, I've never done any ironing, let alone extreme ironing.
It's a sport apparently. People iron on mountains. They iron on boats.
I'm aware of this.
It's very cool
thing that goes on.
I'm not saying I do it. I'm just
yes, indeed. But
I'm not saying I don't do it.
Mentioning it for a friend. But so I did this. I found a story about an underwater PC and then sold it to the BBC World Service Science Unit onto a program called New Ideas. So that was the very first thing I got on air, and then I rather liked that program and thought I'd like to end up presenting it one day. And so I managed to persuade them to give me a bit of presenting when the regular presenter was away. Then they invented another program called Go Digital in 2001, and I really liked that program because it was kind of digital techie kind of stuff. Never got an underwater PC onto it, but nonetheless it was a good show. So I did lots of reporting for them, and then generally in broadcasting the way it works is if you do quite a lot of reporting on a program, you become one of the voices that the producers and the audience are familiar with. And so when the regular presenter went away, I used to do the stand-in presenting, and then one day the regular presenter, Tracy Logan, decided to go off and do other things with her career and take a more academic path, and I'd been filling in for her and she didn't come back, so I just carried on filling in for her for 17 years. So it was just right place, right time.
That was on the science program.
So it was on the technology program Digital Planet. Right. And then there's
the two kind of came together because I was going to ask you, you came into Digital Planet as an established podcast in the early days. So essentially that sort of Digital Planet thing came with the science program presenter role.
It did, yeah.
And Tracy was also doing the Digital Planet podcast. Am I right in remembering that?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, so it was called Go Digital, and then they changed the name to Digital Planet. Then they changed it to Click, and then back to Digital Planet. So there's lots of name changes, but really the very basic part of it is that program and others came from a part of the BBC called the Radio Science Unit, and so it did what it says on it and does what it says on the tin, really, producing a lot of the science output across Radio 4 and World Service. So Digital Planet was a World Service technology program, but the Science Unit also made shows on Radio 4, so I ended up presenting one of those as well. Just as a stand-in. I never had it as a regular gig. Okay. So that's it. So a bit of Radio 4, bit of World Service, bit of science, bit of technology, bit of salt, bit of pepper.
And so you came into Digital Planet as an established podcast, and quite... it can't have been launched for that long. When did it launch? Was it?
So it launched in 2001, and then I became the regular guy in 2005. So
So it had been going for 4 years, and at that time, podcasting was a reasonably new thing. There weren't that many people doing it.
Yeah, you're right. And in fact, it wasn't podcasting at that time. So when it started, it was just broadcast and webcast only.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's one of the quite interesting things. So I remember quite vividly doing a story when I just joined as the presenter. I remember our producer just saying, we're going to do a story with this guy called Adam Curry, who's claiming that he's invented this thing called podcasting, and actually he hadn't, but he was one of the first pioneer podcasters. He was a former MTV presenter. He was a big name at the time, probably still is.
Yeah.
Really fascinating bloke. But he was the first person who really took this thing called podcasting and made it a thing, and we went to interview him, and I've never heard of this thing called podcasting, and I was almost thinking, well, really? Would you want to download a program? They're on the radio, aren't they? Well, why would you do that? So yeah, I remember we didn't break the story, but we were probably the first people on the BBC to talk about podcasting, and then accordingly when the BBC started experimenting with podcasting and initially just had 20 radio shows that it decided to podcast, we were actually not as part of that trial, but then our producer just made an absolute song and dance about it to management, say, well, come on, if we're the tech programme and we're not one of the first programmes to be podcast, this is stupid. So in the end they gave us a podcast feed, and then a few years later, of course, all the programmes were podcast.
Yeah, it's funny actually.
So I've seen that transition, Evan. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah,
it's one of those things. I used to listen to the radio. I don't listen to the radio anymore, because podcasts allow me to listen to what I want to listen to and what I'm interested in. Whereas the radio, you just got to listen to whatever crap they
Yeah.
It used to annoy the hell out of me what does that program they paid on Radio 4, the series, the long-standing series?
The Archers, it's brilliant.
Well, yeah, you think so.
Archers.
I hate it.
Yeah, I'm not really into it.
Well, actually,
Don't ask me
I
questions
say
about it.
that. I have listened to a couple of episodes and they're not bad, but I just wasn't interested in that.
I know, but this, I think this is an important point, and it comes back to this whole idea that we tend to listen to the things that reinforce our views.
Yeah.
And if we're not quite careful, it probably is already happening. That's already happening. People only listen to podcasts that are in a style that they like, with presenters that they like, talking about subject matter that they like, with views that they agree with. At least when you put the radio on, and I still do, I call me old-fashioned, Evan, but I have 3 radio sets at home, and I put them on and I just listen to whatever's there, and I love the serendipity of it. You discover, you listen to some weird documentary about yak farming in Ethiopia or something, and you learn so much from it, and I wouldn't have downloaded that as a podcast. So I think that's my big worry about this. Everything's on demand. Everything's what you want when you want it. And I think it's problematic. He said, sounding old-fashioned. But I don't think I am being old-fashioned, actually. I'm making a serious point about how we share and learn culture through discovery and surprise. And I'm worried that podcasting might stamp some of that out.
I agree with you. I think one of the solutions to problems like that is simply being self-aware. So I think if you're aware that something is a problem, then you can start to work on it. And I do. So I'm aware that that's potentially a problem for me. And so I try to look at the other side of issues as much as possible. But I do agree it's a slippery slope. But I think knowledge helps, because knowledge enables you to start to see more than one side of an issue, and the ability to actually see both sides of the issue at the same time is a skill that is it a skill? I don't know. A talent, whatever it is, that I actively focus on, because I think being able to see things in a balanced way is it's not just important for me, it's probably important for humankind. So just moving on from that, you also have another job, which we've talked about briefly, which is teaching students at Imperial College about science communication. Tell me about that and how it works.
Yeah, sure thing. So it's a master's course in science communication, and when I tell people, they go, "What?" But believe it or not, there are not many of us, but there are a few master's courses around the country in science communication, and part of it is what you'd expect it to be, which would be helping people to get better at communicating science. And we have students who, nearly all of them, have science backgrounds, and in most of their cases they want to transfer from science into something to do with, it might be policy or media or working in museums or setting, digital media, whatever, and they want to kind of take their existing bit where they have science, they're really good at that, but they want ways of understanding how to communicate it. So that's in a way like a very superficial thing that we do.
So, I mean, just to kind of sum up my understanding of why this is important, if correct me if I've got this wrong, you've got a bunch of really nerdy people who probably aren't very good communicators because they're nerds fundamentally. Because they're generally maybe introverts, or they're not good at communicating with people. You teach those people how to actually get out of their shells and communicate accurately about what they do, so that they can explain what they do to the world. Because scientists are quite often, they just struggle to explain because they just live in their head the whole time. Yeah,
and they're doing really complicated stuff and using terminology and ideas that a lay audience wouldn't understand. So yeah, indeed. And so part of it, of course, is just saying, well, don't use the word proxy when you could just say the same as, you know. There's and we get through that pretty much in the first week, and then the rest of the course is really understanding science and understanding communication. And what I mean by that is that about a third of the course, if not a half of it, is really deconstructing science. It would be stuff that often the students are kind of like, wow, we're doing things like philosophy of science or history of science. So understand, having long seminars and discussions about the nature of truth, for instance, and very important thing. So if a scientist says something, does that make it true? Well, yeah, of course, it's based on empirical evidence. It's been through peer review. It's been in a respectable journal. But then on the other hand, but isn't that process politicized? Who are the peer reviewers? How is it that some papers get accepted in a journal and others don't? So we end up saying really that science is what we call socially constructed, which is just a posh academic way of saying it's done by people and people are fallible. And just because it's science doesn't automatically make it the truth. I mean, science, don't get me wrong, is an amazing system. So scientists out there, please don't be offended. I love you dearly, and I spend a lot of time talking to scientists, and I kind of identify as a kind of scientist, having done engineering. But nonetheless, the process of science is historically embedded. It is socially constructed. In other words, it's done by people, and it isn't perfect. So a lot of what this course is about is helping students understand that, so that when they become science communicators, and supposing you become a science journalist writing for like a news website or the Guardian newspaper or what have you, when you sit down and interview a scientist, we would like to think that having done this course, you have not just the skills to communicate that science, but those kind of intellectual skills of inquiry to ask maybe deeper questions about how certain solutions were arrived at or not arrived at. What was the data that was included in your study, but what data was excluded and why? And so there's a big part of that. So there's an academic side and really getting a handle on what science is and breaking down different media structures and communication and so on. But then a good part of it, which is where I come in, is the practical side. So these students need somebody to say, in my case, this is how you plug a microphone in, boom. And then hopefully we go a bit more advanced, but we might talk about presenting technique, how to record interviews, how to edit podcasts, and how to operate a studio. So there's the kind of the how-to and the practical, alongside what we hope is a deep education in what it means to be a scientist and what science is all about, and to be, I suppose, healthily critical and skeptical about elements of science, but not cynical.
Those are two diametrically opposed ends of a very big spectrum. One is extremely, excessively practical, how to plug a microphone in and operate a desk, and the other one borders on the limits of our understanding of philosophy, the universe, and how life works. So that's kind of interesting that you've got that weird juxtaposition of something incredibly practical and something which is, and I suppose that in many ways the thing that you're doing is helping these science students understand where the context of what they do fits within life. Have you read a book or any books by David Deutsch?
No, I know of David Deutsch.
Right.
There are books of his on our bookshelves here, I'm sure. But
he's fascinating, and you should interview him.
It'll be on the reading list of the course.
He's written one book called The Beginning of Infinity, which I've read, and another one, and I'm going to read it again because it is super interesting, and another one called The Fabric of Reality. But one of the things that he talks about is how is the scientific method and what that actually means when you break it down. And in fact, if you think it through, it's true that what we regard as scientific facts are just theories. So if you think about Einstein's theories, for example, the theory of relativity, it's not true. It's not untrue. There are elements of it that are accurate, but it's being picked apart by quantum theory. And so, in a way, it's just
the
like
least untrue way of understanding the universe we have at the moment.
It's the best approximation that we had at the time.
Absolutely. Before
that, we had Newton's laws. They were the best approximation that we had at the time. None of them are true, and on the assumption that science will continue to develop, there will be some new theory that unpicks whatever quantum theory is saying. So, when you start to understand that is the context in which science fits into the world, you then actually start to realise that it's less about science in a way and more about philosophy, and you get to where do we actually fit in the universe as a species? What is the meaning of life?
Well, and what you mentioned there is this theory of paradigm shifts. So there are lots of different ways of thinking about how science progresses. And so one of the most popular theories, and the students love it, is Charles Kuhn's theory of indeed paradigm shifts. So the paradigm at the moment is this way of understanding the universe. Yeah. And then guess what? They go and discover gravitational waves or something else. And then the prevailing belief moves on. And the idea that the way that we understand science, rather than progressing in this very conveniently, incrementally, kind of linear way, is more through a series of crises. So you discover more things about the universe, then everyone goes, so that thing we thought we knew, that's a kind of bollocks, isn't it? We need another way of doing it. And then you move on to another paradigm. And then there's this whole problematic discussion to be had, that we often do have, about, well, who reaches that paradigm? Who are the people in the room who say, well, this is the truth now, or our version of the universe that is the least untrue until the next thing comes along? So it's fascinating. There's another book called What is this thing called Science by it's either Chalmers or Chambers, but it goes through the different, about 5 or 6 different philosophies of science, different ways of understanding not just science, but the way that science understands the universe.
Those books sound super interesting, and we'll capture them and put them in the show notes. What I find actually really interesting about David Deutsch's the book that I'm reading at the moment, it's called Fabric of Reality, is that he believes that eventually we will arrive at a theory of everything. In other words, and it's a really interesting point if you think about it. As science started to develop, we had these different disciplines. So we had biology, we had chemistry, we had physics, and as science has developed, those have started to merge. So we used to have a theory of electricity and a theory of magnetism, and now we've got electromagnetism, because we've realised that actually it's the same stuff. And actually, at some point, I believe we will get to this unified theory of how everything works. So we won't have physics or biology anymore, because the two actually come together at some point, and you'll have and actually, if you get to the kind of you break it all down to, say, a quantum theory, what happens in quantum physics, it would affect biology. It'll affect all sorts of things. So I think it's an interesting idea, but it seems to me to be almost irrefutable that will eventually, sooner or later, happen, that we will have this unified theory of everything. Whether it will actually be able to enable us to predict or understand everything is another thing, because it'll probably be so big that perhaps it won't fit in one person's brain. But
I mean, that's my worry, really. Like, what would that theory actually look like? I mean, it would probably be like a textbook worth or a hard drive worth of theory, which in itself is actually just full of equations taken from other theories.
It could be.
It's a compendium. But
one of the strange things about scientific theories, the ones that turn out to be correct, is that they often turn out to be extremely elegant.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the most obvious thing that we haven't thought of that is the answer. If you think about Einstein's theories, E equals mc squared, all the science behind it is super complex, but that's simple. Anyone can understand that.
Yes, I mean, certainly being able to distill it into a bit like Maxwell's equations, again, that we use a lot in electronics. So they're kind of, when you read them, they're really simple equations, but they're saying some very profound, quite complicated things. And I think the example about how you unify different areas of science, maybe in unlikely ways that could lead to some kind of unified theory. Just like a little mini example along the way is about the kilogram. And little known fact, but until a few years ago, the kilogram was like a mass that was held by the National Physical Laboratory, and there was one in Paris. In other words, a lump of something that was exactly a kilogram. The world of... What is it? Is it not matriculation? I forgot what you call it, but there's a particular word for people who do weights and measures and units and stuff. But they were thrown into crisis when it turned out that these 2 kilograms, the reference kilograms, was just slightly different weights. And so they hang on, we just, or masses, I should say.
It's a disaster.
It's terrible. What are we going to do? We can't believe in the kilogram anymore. And so it just was a catalyst to really supercharge a whole load of work that had been going on probably for decades, if not centuries, to relate the kilogram not to a physical mass sitting in a vault somewhere in a lab, but to like a constant from nature.
Right.
And they were thinking, well, could it be something like the speed of light, or could it be gravity or something? But it's although gravity's not, that's the wrong constant to use. Anyway, whatever. But the one that they ended up leading to was Planck's constant. Right. And I don't know a whole lot about Planck's constant, but what I do know is that it unifies it. Planck's constant ends up being useful in electromagnetic theories and science. And so when you put a kilogram mass onto a scale, then that'll be an electronic scale, and so something about that physical property becomes current and voltage to scales. And then when you can go from the domain of a lump of mass into the domain of electromagnetics, in other words, current and voltage running through circuits and wires, then you can start using Planck's constant, and so you can bring together a constant from nature and electromagnetic theory with just a lump of something sitting in a vault. So it's just one way that these things do unify.
Yeah, and I guess it's the same way we use nuclear clocks now, don't we, to tell time? Because the clock,
the
was
atomic
like
clock. Yeah.
there was a clock somewhere in the world that was supposed to be the most. But we made it atomic, and then it just can't be inaccurate.
Yeah.
So yes, there you go. Science does have some useful function in the world, I believe.
Yes, they should make kittens atomic.
They did.
Good name for a band. Sorry.
There's a anyway. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions, because I'm conscious we're going to need to kind of get through and wrap things up. So I'm going to get you to a couple of very specific questions. I just want to get out, and then we'll start just running through a couple of questions to close things. But what would you advise any young person that's starting out, that wants to get into media today, to do?
They should be as media literate as possible, and the obvious answer is, hey, set up your own podcast, do a YouTube channel, and that's true. That won't do you any harm if you do those things. But if you follow what I did, you just have to be so obsessed with it, you have to live and breathe it, almost like setting up a YouTube channel. Even if you get loads of followers, to me isn't quite enough. Yeah. So what I did back in the day was, I knew that I wanted to work in radio, and I knew what kind of radio I wanted to work in science radio. So this is before you had BBC Sounds, where you could just each little podcast where you could stream it. I just set a cassette player to record it on a timer every single science program, and I listened to every single one, took notes, was very critical about it. So in other words, the shorter answer is, as well as constructing some media, you also need to deconstruct media. You need, if you like your favorite YouTube channel, what is good? Why does it work for you? And you just need to become media literate and media critical, and that means more than just creating your own media. You have to get very good at understanding other people's as well. Yeah.
Hey, listen, one other little story I wanted to ask you about. You obviously work with a lot of BBC presenters, and you and I talked a little bit before this about an experience you had with Jonathan Amos, who's a BBC science correspondent. Do Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, that's a lovely story, and I hope Jonathan doesn't mind me telling the story. But for people who don't know, for the few people who don't know, because John is very well known, but Jonathan Amos is a science correspondent at the BBC and is widely regarded around these circles in science journalism as one of the finest. You know, the science journalist's journalist. He's an amazing guy, broadcaster, writer, and so on. So that gives you a sense of his stature. In other words, he knows a lot about what he's doing, and he's very good at it. And one time we were making a program together for it was a program called The Science Hour, and he was in the studio with me, and we were kind of warming up, ready to go on, and the studio manager was getting everything ready, and I said, "Oh, hey John, how you doing, man?" And he goes, "Oh, a bit nervous actually." And I thought, John never gets nervous. He does, live hits into the 10 o'clock news about really complicated science. Nothing phases him. And he goes, "No, to be honest, I'm a bit nervous." Anyway, he said, "Look, I'm going to be teaching a group of students about science journalism, and they want me to say how I pick stories and how I know what a good story is." And he said, "I don't really know. I know a good story when it comes along, but I've got an instinct for a good story." But he said, "That's not really. I'm not going to hang a whole class just off saying I know one when it comes along. Have a nice life, everybody." So I kind of. And I wasn't even trying to show off. I just said to John, well, it's kind of easy, really. When you break it down, you could just talk to them about, a good science story needs to have magnitude. The bigger something is as an event, the more, impactful it is. And, and it's something that's timely, something that's just come out is more of a story than came out last week. And I said, and you can talk about how exclusives are better than things that the rest of the media have. And then you could, things that are counterintuitive or things that are controversial. And I reeled off about 3 of these things that I just reel off most days of my life to my students, thinking, well, this is just basic stuff. Jonathan definitely knows this. I'm just filling time. And he's going, wow, stop there. Can I just write all that down? And it was such an illuminating conversation because he knows so much about what he does, and he's good at it, but he doesn't quite know why he's good at it. And so it's where I was just humbly quite flattered that I could give somebody who's of this high stature, greater than I'll ever be as a science journalist, that he could say, "That's so useful, so that is what I do. Cheers, mate." And then we started recording and talked about something else.
That's super interesting because I think it just really underlines the point that a lot of people who are very good at what they do, they don't necessarily know how to disassemble it or why they're good at it. They've just done it for a long time. They've become really good at it, and so it's an art for them, not a science.
Like
but
knowing
they
what
don't
to invest in, for instance. And I know you've got the metrics, and there are certain things about a business that you'll look at, and
I don't know
the balance sheet or whatever.
I don't know, but I have a track record that proves that I'm good at predicting it.
Well, exactly. That's the whole point.
But that's the future. Nobody can predict the future. What I do know is what's worked in the past, and I know how to do that again. So, but this is the point I think that I was really trying to get to, and I think this is a really important point. When you start to disassemble what someone does, for them, they can find it really fascinating. He probably didn't know. Well, he clearly didn't know. No. That's the process that he goes through. He's actually never really worked out his own process.
He never needed to know.
He never needed to know, and people don't. And I do think, there's 2 ways of looking at teaching, actually. There's a saying which is, those who can't do teach. And there might be some truth in that, but I think those people who do and teach, those people are the people that know the most, because not only do they know how to do a thing and do it in a very competent manner, but they also understand they can disassemble it and pick it to pieces and actually improve it, because by looking at their process, they can actually say, I can. And if you're forced to explain it also, you kind of then start to do this bit of self-analysis, and you realise that maybe you didn't understand it as well as you thought you did, and you get these little nuances which actually sharpen you up. And I've found that one of the reasons I like to talk about what I do, and one of the reasons that I like to try and explain what I do, is it forces me to be clear about what it is, and it actually helps me clarify what it is that I'm trying to do and where I'm going with it. And I think as a sort of a general principle in life, it's quite important to be able to do that. Well, listen, we've talked about a lot, and we haven't talked about nearly everything that I would like to talk about. I've got a huge list of questions. We can save those for a part 2. What I want to do, though, just before kind of tying things up, is I want to ask you a couple of questions. And one in particular, I'd like you to imagine that if everyone on the world was on Twitter and they all follow you, it's a good start, right? But
I like it already.
But you only, and just imagine the DMs you'd have to deal with, right? It'd be problematic. But you can only tweet once a year, right? If there was a message that you could get out to everyone through this medium, you've got everyone in the world's attention, what would it be?
It's very glib to say, but just be decent to people. Coming back to the lessons I learned from Mum and Dad. Dad always used to say, try and be successful in life, but remember that on the way back down again, you may need the people that you could have trodden on the way up. So just treat people well. Terribly glib, but that would be my message. But that's more than 280 characters, but I'll edit it for the tweet.
That's a great message, and I think it's one that I would very much echo. Well, look, Millie, thank you for your time today. I've really, really enjoyed doing this. I hope you have as well. I think that probably brings us to a close, and I'll look forward to doing a part 2 with you on another time. We've got a huge amount to talk about. I really enjoyed this, so see you soon.
To be continued.
Yeah.